Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook. I'm the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMx Radio podcast. I'd like to warmly welcome as our guest today, Lars Hyland, the CLO of Totara Learning. Welcome, Lars. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you, Rachel. Lovely to be here.
It's great to have you. And just for those of you that are listening in or watching our podcast, just a little bit about Lars. If you don't know him, he is a well-known figure in the HR and workplace learning community, advocating the adoption of adaptable and flexible technology designed to support the new world of work. Lars is an expert in the field of talent experience that brings together learning, engagement, and performance management practices to drive employee satisfaction and productivity. And today we're going to be diving further into learning, engagement, and performance management practices and how their organization, Totara, has been impactful in helping their clients through in the past, and especially this year with everything in influx and the world is experiencing many new normals. And so we're going to talk about that. And just a little bit about Totara. Totara is a provider that offers flexible, powerful, and a platform that's open to that supports learning management, performance management, and employee management or employee engagement. So again, Lars, welcome. And maybe I had shared just a little bit about you, but is there anything else that you'd like to add or add some flavor to who you are?
Sure, Rachel. In many respects, I'm probably one of the unusual people who started out in learning technology, or multimedia as we used to call it back in the day, or hypermedia, if anyone remembers those terms, back in the early 90s, sort of late 80s, early 90s, where the technology was a lot more rudimentary than it is now. It wasn't connected in the same way as we all enjoy with the internet these days. But the fascinating thing is, back in those days, creating interactive learning experiences or training experiences, as we called them, using what we could at the time. We could do quite some sophisticated things if you chose to. All these years later, we've got very slick technology. We can talk to each other, anyone in the world pretty much, if you've got a decent connection, and we can do some wonderful things. But it's fascinating how actually little the learning design thinking has really changed over that period of time. We're still sort of seemingly stuck in some traditional modes of thinking and ways which we could really work on changing, I think, more radically going forward, especially when we look ahead into the immediate term, where I mean the rate of change that we're all experiencing right now, and the fresh sets of skills that all of us need to have when we're inside any organization, doesn't matter what sector you're in. We're being radically affected by the digital transformation pushes right across the board. So I've been fascinated by that whole thing for decades now, and still passionate about really seeing the advanced tools that we've now got being used more effectively by all of us in HR, L&D teams, anyone who's interested in really moving the dial when it comes to people's performance in their jobs. And there's so much we could be doing better, and that's something that I like to think we're doing something positive about ourselves here at Totara. So yeah, it's a long-standing interest, Rachel.
And Totara, how is the culture like at Totara? I think that the culture is so important, and it really is, just to kind of understand, your culture and how does that impact the way that you work with your clients?
Yeah, sure. Well, a bit about Totara. I mean, we're 10 years old as an organization. We were born virtual from Wellington, New Zealand, to Brighton, UK, where I'm speaking to you right now. And so from those early origins, rapidly grew through very strong collaborative partnering around the world with different learning technology specialists all around the world, to have what we now have over 1,500 organizations using Totara to support enterprise use of their learning and development, performance management and engagement, right across the board, lots of different sectors. So how could we do that effectively, managing what is probably the worst time zone to deal with from New Zealand and the UK? Well, we had to really dedicate ourselves to having an open and collaborative and transparent communication really across the board as we grew the numbers of people. So obviously when you start, you're a relatively small number of people. We are now heading towards 100 people around the world, relatively small in the scheme of things, but growing quickly. And we've kept a culture which I think is very positive, leverages our own technology. So we sort of drink our own champagne. We use Totara itself in our own company to support ourselves. And as a result, it really keeps us close to what customers are experiencing. Good, the bad, what could be better. It's all very important to do that. So that collaborative, open nature is borne out by the fact that our technology itself is open. It is open source, so that gives one, that speaks to one of the real needs, I think, growing needs for organizations out there now, is more control over these sorts of platforms so that they can differentiate themselves going forward, and really meet the changing needs of their business, which is dramatically more challenging than it ever has been. The horizon that we're having to plan on has just shrunk from years to, well, months, probably beyond quarters down to months. So you need to be able to turn quickly and agilely and adapt very effectively. So that's what we're about, I think. I think we've had to do that ourselves as a group of people in Totara to sort of adapt as we've gone over this past decade of work. And going forward with our talent experience platform, it's something that we think is really well suited to support organizations when they have these similar challenges. And I think as many of us have all spoken about, this past year, the pandemic has really forced us to adapt or confront the fact that we can't adapt, one of the two. And many organizations, they haven't been that effective. They haven't been quite brittle in the face of what has been dramatic change. But we've seen less of that. We've seen some really interesting examples of how organizations could flexibly change in the face of quite big, huge changes around the world.
Well, let's talk about those examples. Can you share a few client success stories that you're proud of?
Yeah, sure. Well, in talking most recently in the past 12 months, we have a lot of healthcare organizations use Totara, and they use it for the full range, mandatory type training, healthcare training itself, reaching out to thousands of people in their organizations. So it's here in the UK, we have the NHS, which is 1.3 million people now work for the NHS collectively, and a significant percentage of those are actually having their training mediated through our platform now. In the pandemic, there was, like in many countries, a rapid need to stand up hospitals, stand up people who weren't trained in things like ventilator training or other care needs, because in the face of the real high demand on hospitals, many more people needed training. So we've seen our platform facilitate that through access to that training, scaling accordingly. There's one example actually in Italy. The healthcare institute there went from a normal sort of service for 40,000 healthcare professionals across the country, but in 1 month they had to jump that to 450,000, which was a huge, significant thing to do.
I think you got awarded from Brennan Hall Group with an Excellence Award for that client.
Yes, indeed. I think you're right. Yeah. So yeah, a good number of our customers have managed to win some interesting awards because of their ability to really adapt quickly. Yeah, exactly. So that one is one stands out.
That certainly does. And you know, it's interesting how open source has it really has come a long way since the last 10 years when it first came about. I think a lot of companies were apprehensive because of it being open sourced and not you know, regulated, or companies like in healthcare. So you know, when you mentioned that you have so many healthcare companies that are starting to adapt your solution, you know, that's something to say. The perception of what open source is, you know, as far as regulation and confidentiality, you know, what are your, you know, being that open source is also, and that's kind of the premise, is that it's easy, it's adaptable, it's you can, you know, you have the ability to make changes as you need. You know, what do you say, you know, what as far as healthcare, you know, adapting in an environment where they have a lot of regulations? How come they are now turning that around and starting to accept open source more so?
Yeah, I think that talks to a common myth about open source, which is when you hear open source, you think it can't be secure, or it can't be, you know, it doesn't scale, or there are problems. And you know, that's actually a truism of any software. It doesn't matter whether it's open source or otherwise. If it's poorly designed or not maintained well, then it can have those challenges, right? And it's not about being open source. What's good about being open source, or what's different about being open source, is that you are not blocked from being able to unilaterally make some improvements or changes, should I say, or integrations that you as an organization need, specifically independently of, say, a roadmap that's marching forward. Now we have a roadmap that marches forward, and the majority of our organizations, you know, stick to that roadmap. But there comes and increasingly, I'd say, in the current climate, and when we look forward, it's only going to get more so, that we need to be able to offer organizations that control so that they have the freedom to do things differently when they need their businesses to respond and their people to respond. The alternative, we see this quite a lot, don't we, where if you have a bit of a black box software solution and it works maybe right now, but give it 6 months time and your business needs change, and you might actually find yourself with a solution that's not a solution anymore. It's not fit for purpose. And that may be feature based, but it may also be commercially based. You know, you may be stuck with something. And yeah, too often that I think learning management systems of old, you know, have got a bad rap because of those types of situations, you know, where you get the tumbleweed. People aren't using it because it's not really aligned to the new sets of needs that the organization has. So we don't see that happening as much. You know, our partner network is able to sort of localize and meet a specific sector requirement or a regulatory requirement. So for example, we work closely with the USDA, over federal government in the US. They're using Totara, big strong advocates of our platform, but you know, that's about it being open and flexible to meet specific needs that they can roll out to what is quite a complex organization of, you know, I think they have around 2,000 administrators that need to use our platform in flexible ways. So it's you know, I think we're seeing increasing interest in having that level of control. And then also not just about the learning side, it's about bringing all of the components together that underpin what I think motivates people at work, to perform well and to develop well in their role. And as HR professionals, we sort of need to think a bit differently about how we organize ourselves to support that going forward.
Absolutely. And I feel with the open source solution, or what your company offers, is the ability to provide what the client needs at that time, and to be able to adapt over time. Where we have spoken in the past, or even currently, to a lot of companies that we help when they are selecting solutions, and oftentimes they want to switch from their current platform or solution because they're just not utilizing it, or they don't feel that it is scaling to their ability. And oftentimes, I think sometimes companies buy on too much that they need, and especially large global organizations, and then they have all these other features or functionalities that they are still not using, and it could be 2 years. So they feel dissatisfied. One, maybe they haven't really defined their strategy, so they don't really know yet, what they need, or the resources and time and effort it takes to roll it out across their divisions. So then when they look at the ROI and they feel that, or they see they're spending way more and they're not even utilizing half the platform or half the features, or understand what their needs are. So I think it's really important. And I think from, some of these newer solutions, or even more traditional legacy platforms, as they move forward into the future, it's really the critical aspect is the adaptability and flexibility and scalability, and especially with how our world is changing, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about some of what you see as predictions into the future. We've seen so much change this past year that we never would have imagined. So I'm curious, I'm curious, you're a learning expert. What's your magic ball? What does it predict for us?
That's a fool's game, though, isn't it, Rachel? I mean, especially when you look at the past year where things very unexpected happen. But
right, don't worry. If not, we'll just.
No, I'm joking with you. I've got lots of thoughts about how things will transpire. I mean, it's not just me. If you look at the World Economic Forum, for example, they produced a report last October, which was looking at what is the future skills mix that we need to stay relevant, I think, in the workplace as organizations really accelerate, I think, along their digital transformational pathways. So more and more sectors will just much more deeply be affected in that way. And I was just hearing it just recently that characterized that while we talk about digital, ones and zeros, we're sort of digitizing everything. That's moving into a new era where we've got some, which completely relates to what we've just experienced with the pandemic, is the ability to transform the pace of like vaccines, for example, but all sorts of genetic improvements, which is a bringing together of making those industries an information technology. So more and more sectors are being affected in that way, which drives transformation. That then drives huge changes in the job roles and the skills mix that we need. And when you look at that report, which I'd recommend, and we could share a link to it, is they pinpoint 10 sort of key skill sets, and they broadly sit in the categories of quite soft skills, being able to communicate more effectively with each other, for us to be more sophisticated in our use of technology. So we'll be working with much smarter technology imminently, so how do we engage with that, and how do we understand what that technology is guiding us to do? For example, there's lots of ethical issues and all sorts of things that we're going to need to have a good handle on. So all of those skills, we need to find ways to build them in our people, and we have to build them because we can't just go and recruit them. There's just not enough people with those skills, just out there. That's a fairly poor strategy to adopt. So I think we do.
To that point, we saw in our research this year that those companies that were performing in spite of what was happening in, in the environment and globalization, those companies that were still performing and did not have to let go of any of their employees, in fact, they focused on reskilling and shifting and restructuring their workforce. So they were able to optimize, people in different roles where, if they had a storefront, people weren't going into the storefront. They had to train them, let's say, on being able to do telesales. So, had more people in call centers, so, what we saw was eye-opening for those companies that were sustainable, adaptable, and successful, is that they rethought and were able to do it quickly, as you know. And for us, we were sending out pulse surveys all year long, week by week or month by month. We gradually kind of slowed them down, but at the very beginning, we're like, oh wow, okay, this week this is happening. Okay, we've got to take a look at a lens of what's happening next week. So to your point, the ability to reskill is critical.
Absolutely. And, it's also just thinking beyond the learning aspect of it, so when we think about people at work, if people are going to be adaptable, they need to be resilient, they need to be aligned around a common purpose, and, and really sort of roll with change, or positively roll with change, or even resist certain changes in positive ways. So how do they do that? It's not just about, training people. It's also about giving them feedback and guidance, and that's a continuous process, I think, going forward. So less about the sort of annual appraisal. That's too slow. It needs to be more about continuous access to peer feedback, expert feedback across your organization. Sort of more of a coach mentor type of culture should be more predominant. So yeah, combining those three things together, that's exactly what we've tried to do with the talent experience platform, is bring those typically separate components. They're often separate systems inside organizations, and as a result, well, maybe not as a result, I think it is a result of HR functions being a little bit more siloed than they perhaps should be. So performance management happens with one team over there, L&D happens in another area, you've got leadership type activities in another, internal comms. So it's too fragmented. So if you're any one individual working in an organization that's like that, then you could find yourself quite confused by the different messaging that comes through to you. It could be quite fragmented and not really aligned. So having tools and technology in a platform, talent experience platform, that does allow you to align it, I think you're going to get much better outcomes as a result for your people.
Absolutely. Lars, thank you so much for joining me today and talking to our community and sharing some of your expertise. If anybody would like to follow up with you, what's the best way to reach you? And also, if there's anything else you'd like to share, or you have any upcoming events or announcements, feel free to do so now.
Sure. Well, I'd encourage everyone to take a look at our website. We've got a full listing there of our webinars. I've got one interesting conversation with Josh Burson next week. That's one I would highlight to people. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for Lars Hyland. There is only one, so you should be able to find me. And yeah. I think we've got some really useful resources. Again, look on the website. We can also share some links to as follow-up.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lars. And I think we have some upcoming webinars with Brandon Hall Group and you as well coming up this year. So look out for lots of great stuff coming your way. Thank you again. And thank you all for listening in and chiming in today. Take care, be healthy, and stay well.
Thank you.